Hello, this is Hard Compound, an American take on Formula One. We just finished watching the Belgium race. If you wish to call that a race, we are not sure what to call it. We are not sure what went down. I think even FIA, F1, is still trying to figure out the rules and remake the new ones. We're going to break it all down for you, go through that and all the summer news, and then look at the second half of the season, which is now sort of underway. But first, son, what are you drinking?
Yeah, today I have Mango Cart by Golden Road Brewing, located in Los Angeles, California. It's a wheat ale with a touch of mango flavor on it. Yeah, I like trying new beers, and so I picked this one up because a few of my friends were drinking it. And honestly, not my favorite thing. I am more of a classic, don't mess with a good beer kind of person. But really, if you're kind of vibing in the summer, you want a little fruity beer, this with a nice little hint of mango is pretty good.
Oh, that's good. That sounds like the Belgium 2021 race of beers. I am from the Heartland Arbor Brewing Company. They're Oktoberfest. We are deep into a late August summer heat wave, but I thought I would give this one a try. Nice little refreshing beer. We'll let you know. It's fine. It's a little bit hoppier than I think it should be, and that seems to be the way of the world at this moment, but it's drinkable. So, Belgium, the end of the summer break. Everyone was excited. A wonderful track, turns, hills, speed. I believe that's where Schumacher had his first race, I think, 30 years ago. So we all were looking forward to it. And then the inexplicable happened. Weather, still more weather, then a sort of aborted start. Checo decided he didn't want to race that day and just sort of spun out on the formation lap. Then they brought everybody back in, and then hours passed. Sky did decent coverage. And they brought everyone back out. And then I sort of forget what happened. And then they decided to bring everyone back out for 2 laps behind the safety car for reasons we'll never truly know. But so that was the most inexplicable race that I've seen in my long life. So let's get your initial thoughts.
Yeah, so yesterday I was traveling, so I didn't get to watch the race in real time in the morning like I usually do, but I stayed off of social media and stayed away from any kind of coverage like I normally do if I miss the race. And then, turned it on last night. I was watching it and spent 4 hours just messing around because there's nothing to pay attention to. It was very strange. Definitely, like you said, it was inexplicable. It was one of the weirdest races, I guess, that I've ever seen. And just, I mean, you can't really do anything about the weather, but I don't know. I think quite a few decisions were made that I think most people probably don't agree with, didn't think they were the right decisions.
Yeah. So they decided to actually have no race, send the drivers around for 2 laps behind a safety car so they could call it a race, then distributed points based on qualifying, but only half as many points as normal. So, I get the sense that FIA, that F1 has rules and regulations for everything, and then they just say, well, let's just make shit up. I mean, because none of this sounded as if it should have happened. And I was a bad dad because I should have said, Patrick, look, it's just it's for reasons I don't understand here in America. It's apparently bitter cold in late August in Belgium, and it's pouring rain, and there is no race. There will be no race. Don't waste your time.
Yeah, I have been to sporting events in that kind of weather, and I have been pissed at myself for even going. And I literally got to see the sporting event. These fans that were sitting around for 4 hours in the pouring rain and cold didn't get anything. They were told that in fact there was a race on Sunday yesterday, and they probably went home and were like, there was no race. That was just 4 hours that we spent miserable and nothing to show for it.
Yep.
Yeah, it was I think multiple racers and even like Zach Brown, I think, basically said that it was sort of ridiculous what was done, that they ran 2 laps behind a safety car just so they could say that there was a race, so that points could be distributed, so that sponsors were happy. I guess it just seems so ridiculous that was how they decided they were gonna proceed. And quite frankly, I think it's kind of a shame. I don't believe that FIA's role is to force a race to happen. They should be there to enforce the rules and keep drivers safe.
Yeah.
That in my opinion is their job, not to put on a race, right? And that's what they chose to do, which I think wasn't the correct decision.
Yeah. We're always trying to promote F1 to Americans, and we're going to have to table this race and just sort of never bring it up again. It's sort of like the teenage girl who spends her babysitting money to see Guns N' Roses, goes to the amphitheater, the outdoor concert venue, 4 hours in the rain, and then someone finally comes out and says, Axl Rose says you're all stupid, and then they never show up. That one was a tough one to watch. I watched it from the comfort of my home. Those poor fans were screwed hard. But there was actually, over the weekend, a lot of news. So let's go through some of the points. So, for example, they handed out half points based on qualifying. Lando, we now know foolishly, took that turn much too fast. He spun out, crashed his car. He was out. So he got no points. And that McLaren was actually pretty fast this weekend. And then, of course, and his teammate, fourth in qualifying, Ricciardo finally gets some points, some legit points. And then I think the big story, other than the debacle of calling that a race, George Russell gets second on the grid. So he got on the podium. What do you think of that?
Yeah, lots of interesting sort of headlines to be made. If you didn't watch the race, you're going, oh my gosh, George Russell ended up in second place. He ended up on the podium at Belgium in a Williams. That's insane. Which it is. Unbelievable qualifying session from him. And rightly so. He's gotten major props from everybody around Formula One. And everybody kind of knew it was going to happen eventually, that he was going to break out and score some major points and really be a rising star in F1. So good to see that from him. Everybody was very excited for him. I think, yeah, Lando Norris, I was a little bit upset on Saturday during qualifying when that happened. Even before the race happened, all this craziness surrounding it, I was upset because before that happened, he was complaining that his car was aquaplaning all over the place. Just obviously dangerous conditions. Vettel, before that happened, said this qualifying session needs to be red flagged. We need to stop this before somebody gets hurt. And then a minute later, Lando goes flying into the barriers, crashes out, needs to replace his gearbox, gets a 5-place grid spot penalty. Just everything that could go wrong for him did, through almost no fault of his own. I was talking about like the role that FIA should play or the job that they should do is to keep drivers safe. But I think drivers' role has nothing to do with that. They're supposed to go out and compete and drive as hard as they can in whatever conditions they are. So Lando not coming into the pits or sort of maybe people say, oh, that's foolish. He shouldn't go that hard. That I think is the incorrect thing to believe. His job is to push the limits. And that's what he was doing. And that's why he was so fast during qualifying. Unfortunately, it came back to bite him because the FIA took their sweet time red flagging that session.
Yeah, that was an odd one because you're right. I mean, he and Vettel had both stated conditions. I mean, the safety car had been out there. Track officials knew what the conditions were. I was surprised. I mean, I think they felt, look, we have this narrow window for qualifying. We've got to get it in. But yeah, I mean, that was some pretty harrowing conditions there. But the whole weekend was crazy. Like I mentioned, Checo was sort of, taking himself out on the formation lap, and it's like, oh, well, now that the race is delayed, we have time to fix his car. Not that that mattered. I mean, it goes in the record books. George Russell, second place. I believe Nikita Mazepin got the fastest lap. I mean, and Nikita Mazepin, probably the worst driver in F1 and probably the worst car in F1, just essentially by the throw of the dice, got fastest lap. But I'm not sure. Does he actually get a point? Does he get half a point? How does that even work?
Well, it doesn't matter because he wasn't in the top 10, basically. So,
that's right.
Yeah.
He does not get the. That's right. You have to be okay. So we don't have to concern myself with that. I think the other oddity was during the long rain, you could see those poor fans. They looked bitter cold. They kept showing Belgian people. Apparently, they don't know about ketchup because they kept showing them dunking their fries into mayo, and it was the nastiest thing. They kept repeatedly showing scenes of that, and I just thought, can we please tell these poor people about ketchup or even maybe malted vinegar, for example. We do not need to see this at all.
Oh my goodness.
So
some
of that was just crazy.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I guess controversial point for both of us. Mayo is gross. So don't dunk your fries in it.
No,
anyways.
Okay, some of the other interesting news leading up to this crazy so-called race. Alonso re-signed. He'll be back with Alpine in 2022. Why was that news? I thought he had already signed. I was shocked that they announced that the Alpine announced that Alonso signed for 2022.
Well, I mean, if he signs, then I think that's a good thing for Alpine, and they kind of want to keep the momentum going from Ocon's last race win. And, I think that's a good signing for Alpine. They kind of don't really have one of the better driver academies. So it's going to be a little bit challenging to sort of bring up new drivers like Red Bull is able to do, or Ferrari is able to do, or Mercedes for that matter, right? So keeping a veteran around, I think, is a good thing. Alonso has proven to be still an incredible driver at 40 years old. And I think signing him to kind of 1-year deals until he, chooses to move on, I think is probably the right move, just in everybody's self-interest. I think that works really well. So
yeah. I mean, Alonso is still getting it done. When we've talked about this before, I somewhat feared that he was coming back and it was more ceremonial, more of a coronation. Alpine, to help their brand, wanted to get the name Alonso, but he's proven he's at least still a top 10 driver. It's also great to have these drivers on there that sort of span the generations. It's fun to see them. I mean, Kimi Räikkönen is such a sort of a bit of a dour presence. I mean, I think he's so far past his prime that I won't miss him when he's gone, which could be at the end of the season. But guys like Vettel, Vettel is just, Vettel totally embodies the sort of the Obi-Wan vibe and is happy to teach the younglings. Alonso, like you said, age 40, still getting it done. So that was great. But speaking of re-signs, and yet another inexplicable act, Red Bull re-signed Checo, which I do not understand that. When you look at who Red Bull has on the sidelines, like Albon, they could get Hulkenberg. They've got other drivers. I don't understand the Checo re-signing. Do you?
The only way I can explain that is to basically believe that Red Bull sees him as their Bottas. Just get up there on the podium, back Max up. You know, he's our number one guy. You're very clearly our number two guy. All we need you to do is finish the race with that car. You should be in the top five at the very least. It doesn't really seem like he's gotten that done this year, so I don't really know why they decided that they were going to re-sign him, but maybe they're thinking like he brings in some money and there's nobody else that we believe is going to play that role better than he will. So that's the only reason I see them doing that.
Yeah, I mean that could be it. I think on a previous episode, one of my predictions was that some former F1 drivers who were still hanging on and still trying to get back in would never get back in. That's Kvyat, Hulkenberg, and Albon. And I feel for Albon. He was unceremoniously booted. I'm not sure it was fair, but there was also a case to made he should have been given more time. But I'm not seeing anything from Checo Perez, who seems like a nice guy, that Albon couldn't provide them, and for far more years. So maybe Red Bull also thinks that after the 2022 season, they'll bring in a new guy. And so they only want to sign, they don't want to bring someone on who could be there for years. But boy, it is tough to be an F1 driver. It's the rare sport where not only do you have to be the best in the world, that's still not a guarantee. you know. What did you think just before the qualifying? I think it was Alonso, the helmet cam. So I'm not sure if our listeners saw that, but if you have F1 TV, or it might even just be on the F1 site, I thought that was a pretty cool view.
Yeah, it gives you a better sort of indication of what the drivers see. And that's a pretty fun camera that they've sort of been able to place inside of his helmet without causing any kind of distraction or disruption. It's a lot of fun. I think people get a better sense of what these drivers, what the conditions are for them, and sort of what they go through throughout a race or even just one lap. It's pretty demanding for them, and it's cool to get to see that.
Yeah, you really got a much better sense of sort of the physical demands of the physical beating it takes on the driver. We get these helicopter shots, we get these overhead shots, and we hear the cars whiz by, and it's we sort of think it's like going down the big hill on a roller coaster, but it is just a physical toll it takes. I really thought that helmet cam showed it off. That was pretty cool. Speaking of having cams around, I saw a commercial for the Michael Schumacher documentary. It's going to be on Netflix. They've been doing Drive to Survive, which I hear is helping boost F1 viewership in America. I'm not sure about that, but it's a decent series, Drive to Survive, and I've heard they're going to have a fourth series next year, so that should be fun. But also next month, the Schumacher documentary, and that one could be, given what happened to Schumacher in these last few years, that could be tough to watch. So what do you think of that one?
Yeah, I think for a lot of people, his name is synonymous with F1, and I think having his son now racing in the series, there's probably no better time for this to come out and for people to get a closer look at what Michael Schumacher kind of went through and what his life was like. And I think it'll be a tough watch, but I think it'll be really sort of interesting and insightful to see sort of his life and his progression through the sport.
Yeah, I mean, he was a beast. Just sort of the fierceness plus the talent was just amazing to watch. So that part should be fun. It's also just great to see his son in F1. Haas signed him. Everyone thought, it was maybe for sponsorship, maybe for some visibility, but Mick has turned out to be a good driver, what seems like a good person, great presence, really helps promoting F1. I think everything that could go right with the Mick Schumacher signing for Haas has gone right. So that's been nice to see.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. He's been really, really fun to watch this year, I think. And I think a lot of eyes are on him too. And he's kind of lived up to it, which is nice to see.
Yeah, he has. With the Yuki, a bit less so. So I'm still a little suspect if Yuki will be back next year, though we haven't heard about him. As bad as this race result was for Belgium, it is starting. We are getting into the heart of the season, and it looks great. After Belgium, a week later, they go to the Netherlands. Then it's Italy a week after that, and then Russia, then Turkey. I mean, over 2 months. Imagine if you were an F1 fan and could travel and watch all the F1 races. So from September through October, Belgium, Netherlands, Italy, Russia, Turkey. I mean, that's just amazing. I mean, this is such an amazing sport. But they also announced, well, we knew there would be no Japan race this year. They canceled that, but they are going to have at least one makeup race. Everyone thinks it'll be in Qatar. So, what are your thoughts on you think the rest of the schedule for the year?
I think that it's kind of difficult for them to decide exactly the races that are going to happen just because each sort of nation and government makes their own rules and decisions. And sometimes those races end up getting taken off of the calendar, which is pretty disappointing. Again, no Canada this year. Like you just said, no Japan again, which is disappointing to say the least. Those are always fun races that I really like watching. But adding in Qatar, I think will be cool. I assume it'll be a really fun and exciting track. But more and more of these sort of oil rich Middle Eastern countries are, getting in on F1. And I think there's just so much money being poured into the sport from those areas that I think we're going to keep seeing more and more races in those types of locations. I think we're getting is it Syria or Saudi Arabian Grand Prix at some
Saudi
point?
Arabia.
Yeah, Saudi
Yeah,
Arabia.
I don't think there would be one in Syria.
Yeah, that seems odd, doesn't it?
That might be a tough one. But yep, Saudi Arabia, they're working on the course. Qatar, Abu Dhabi. So yeah, it's great. Miami next year. So you gotta love F1. You brought up money. I always like talking about money. Two of the big kind of money related stories over the past week or two. Number one, I brought this up in a previous episode. These teams are sort of financially on the hook for rebuilding their car after crashes. And that, especially when they're going to have limits on spending, is going to make things very difficult. They'll also face grid penalties in some instances if they need to replace the engines enough times. The Ferrari boss said if someone causes the crash, that's the team that should have to pay. I agree with him. What do you think of that?
I think in theory that would be lovely. Unfortunately, there would be endless litigation if that happened, and I think it would ruin the sport. So I don't believe that will ever even come close to happening. Just having a team say, like, for example, when Bottas crashed into everybody, took a whole bunch of people out, right? Mercedes then would have to essentially pay all of these other teams for the damages. And Mercedes is a massive company. They are then going to go and say, well, we're not paying you. Why would we pay you? Can you prove that Bottas was exclusively at fault and, that these are the true cost of damages, et cetera, et cetera. And then, there's a massive legal back and forth and it's never ending. And then there's more animosity between teams, owners, everything like that. I think that's not a good idea.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's a good point. I had thought of that because you're right. For example, in the recent Botas crash, they could say, Lando put his brakes on too soon, or he braked too hard, or something like that. Stroll got pushed out of the way when he crashed into Leclerc. They could say. So yeah, you're right. Maybe it just becomes impossible to referee that in a sense.
Right. I think more likely is the grid penalty issue, right? If you basically have to replace something, an engine or some other, a gearbox or what have you, and incur a grid penalty because of that, and it was related to a crash that basically the stewards or whoever deemed wasn't your fault, I don't think that you should have to incur that grid penalty, right? I think Max, actually, both Red Bull drivers, I think, and both Ferrari drivers are on their last engine before they get a grid penalty. And, at least one of those, I think for every one of them, was caused by some crash that they were not at fault for. And, in those situations, I think it maybe isn't necessarily fair that they have to get a penalty for that.
Yeah. I mean, that grid penalty could really harm Red Bull, especially because Max is in such a tight race with Lewis for the championship. Him having a grid penalty because Mercedes took him out several times is just that's a tough one. So yeah, so that might be something that could work. Another, I thought this was an interesting money story, but I think it's mostly just rumor, is Michael Andretti of the American Andretti racing family, big in Indy, is rumored to be trying to gather together money to buy an F1 team. People have suggested Haas or Williams or Alfa Romeo. They've said it will take at least 200 million as a buy-in fee, which may sound like a lot, but I think the NFL buy-in fee now is probably close to $1 billion. So there's still plenty of room to grow in F1. So what do you think? Do you think anything will come of that rumor? Do you think we'll see any new ownership next year or see any more American money pouring into F1?
I think it would be really cool if Andretti Autosport basically expanded into F1. They are a big presence in Indy already. And I think, that is something that would be a lot of fun to see Andretti back in F1, basically. I think it's probably unlikely that it will happen, although you never know. I think Gene Haas has already kind of put the kibosh on that, on Andretti coming in to Haas. The other two I think you mentioned are Williams and Alfa Romeo, and both of them in the last couple of years got kind of new corporate money, basically. So I don't necessarily see Andretti coming into those teams. I have heard that he and Zach Brown have, done some ventures before together. And you never know if Andretti can kind of get involved with McLaren or Mercedes, something like that would be kind of cool as well. So,
yeah, we'll see. I mean, there's just F1's becoming so big, it's so global. I believe, every single F1 race has about as many viewers as the Super Bowl. That's how big it is. So I think, for example, you mentioned the Haas team. Gene Haas was wealthy by our standards, probably not by billionaire standards. And I think Haas will be sort of the last F1 team that sort of was ever able to just sort of scrape together, a crew, an engine, build stuff from others that did not have multi-billion-dollar investment funds behind them, or a truly global company that's very brand centric like Red Bull or Mercedes. So yeah, I think this might be a bit of a pipe dream by Andretti. I think Haas got in at exactly the right time, despite all the troubles they've had. And I think it's going to take a lot more than what Michael Andretti can put together. But it would be cool to see, as you said, maybe Zach Brown from McLaren, and Andretti do a lot more. McLaren's getting a lot more involved in Indy. Who knows what we'll see? Some kind of like, racers swapping across, some cool races. We'll see. Who knows? Maybe we'll see some interesting technological developments. We'll definitely see some cool branding going on with Zach Brown in charge. Now, speaking of Zach Brown, Mercedes, Red Bull, all these guys, they love cars, but they also sort of see the writing on the wall where everything is becoming electrified. We want sustainability, we want green energy, and there's this push for the 2025 F1 engine regulations to be more green, as we say. I'm sort of on the side of Christian Horner at Red Bull, where he said, look, we want cool, loud, fast engines. But I think at some point you're heading into a certain sort of global reality and cultural gestalt where it's like, look, combustion engines are 20th century. We need to move into something else. So what are your thoughts on that?
I think a lot, has kind of been made of Toto Wolff and Christian Horner's comments about those, impending 2025 engine regulations, where people seem to suggest that they're kind of in opposite corners. And I don't necessarily think that that's true. Horner, like you said, he is sort of backing more sort of high rev internal combustion, but also hybrid kind of engines that give you some kind of emotional sort of feeling when you hear them. And Toto Wolff basically has said that he is definitely wants to go in like a sustainable direction. And I think that both of those can be true at the same time. You don't need to use petrol. You can use some sort of synthetic fuel or biofuel or something like that to reduce the sort of carbon footprint of a single F1 engine. But for me, the more sustainable path doesn't really have to do with engine regulations. It's more about logistics and travel for the teams. That's where a lot of the carbon footprint of Formula One comes in, right? You're traveling all over the world, hauling all kinds of stuff all over the world. That's a lot of fuel and basically carbon that you're putting out into the world. And I think if they focus more on that kind of stuff, it'll lead to a more sustainable sport rather than worrying about the specific engine regulations involved for the cars. So that's kind of my take. I think both are right, but I'm with you. I love a good high rev sound coming off of those F1 cars that you can hear from miles away from the track.
Yeah, no, but that's a really good point, because one of the favorite aspects of F1 for me is it's global. As we said, they'll have a race in Miami next year. They have a race throughout Europe. They go to Asia, the Middle East, Australia. I love that about F1. There's no other sport really that does that. And to me, that's one of the best things about it. But you're right. Hopefully, FIA and others are working to figure out a way of limiting their carbon footprint as they travel around the world. So we want to keep that, but be mindful of the impact. So next week, there's no long break. We go right to the Netherlands. The first race there, I believe, since 1985. So that is a long time in between races. And they said fans will be there, but it will be at 2/3 capacity. That's still a lot of people. What are your thoughts on the Dutch Grand Prix?
Very excited for it. Get this bad taste out of my mouth from from Belgium. Hopefully it's not too rainy in Holland. But yeah, like you said, 35 years later, we go back, which is pretty cool. I think, having a Dutchman, Max Verstappen, as one of the title favorites is going to make it all the more exciting. And having a good crowd there is going to be pretty intense for the rest of the competition, I think.
Yeah, it's funny. Like 1985, Ronald Reagan was president. There was no internet. I'm trying to think back. Wow, that was even well before Schumacher even started. That was a long time ago. So I'm looking forward to that. Now, one of the features we started, we give our predictions for the upcoming race. Across the line, we call it. That's one of our main features. We tell each other who we think is going to win, place, show, top five. We each choose. Why don't you kind of give the listeners a quick rundown of across the line, how it works, and then we'll make our picks.
Sure. So, how we do it basically is we're each going to draft 5 drivers. And basically, once a driver is taken, once they're picked, you can't take them again. So, there's going to be 10 drivers selected in total. And we're going to draft them in the order we think that they will finish in. So, 1 through 5. And 1 point is going to be awarded if the driver does finish in the top 5, but you're going to get 3 points if you get the exact finishing position correct for that driver. So that's kind of how it's going to work. And I guess I'll let you go first this time because I went first the last time.
All right. So I think Dutch Grand Prix, first place, Max Verstappen.
Ooh, did not see that coming.
All right, now you go.
That is cool. I am going to go in potentially an unexpected direction. After a couple of disappointing outings, Lando Norris is going to get his first place.
Wow, Lando. Okay, well, then you should go again.
Okay, then I will take, interesting, Lewis Hamilton coming in second place.
Lewis, that means I cannot take Lewis. So I will go with the Red Bull first and second. For my second, I'm going to go with Perez.
Oh, wow.
Except I cannot do that. I've messed it up. You should go. You get to go again, right? No. You did Lando and you did Lewis, so it is my turn.
Yes.
So I get to do Perez. I'm going to say he comes in second, and in third. Wow, I can't take Lando. I'm going to do Ocon.
Ooh, very interesting. Another podium.
AlphaTauri. Yeah.
All right. I will then go with, I'll take Lando's teammate, Daniel Ricciardo, getting on the podium in third place.
Wow.
Yep.
Wow. A good showing for McLaren. Nice. All right. And now who do you think for fourth?
That is a good question. I am going to go with a nice Ferrari top 5 finish, Charlie Leclerc.
Wow. Nice. Nice. So for my fourth, since you took Leclerc, I'm going to go with Sainz. And in fifth, Bottas. We forget Bottas, but he does have that Mercedes. So
he does have that Mercedes. But my fifth place finisher is going to be probably wrong, but I'm going to go with George Russell.
Oh, nice. Nice. So, all right. So I have Max, Perez, Ocon, Sainz, and Bottas in my top 5. And your top 5 is Lando, Lewis, Ricciardo, Leclerc, and Russell. So that would be an interesting race, no matter who wins on that one. So, any crazy predictions for the race or for the rest of the season?
Yeah, well, I hope it's a more exciting race this coming weekend as opposed to this past weekend. My crazy prediction for the Dutch Grand Prix is, I kind of spoiled it a little bit already, but the Orange Army is going to be there in support of Max Verstappen, but we're going to have an orange front row to start the race. Both McLarens on the front row.
Nice, nice. That would be good, especially, we're big Alonso fans. McLaren, when he was there, was just so woeful. I mean, the trajectory has just been great to watch. My crazy prediction for this next race, I don't know if I have one, but I will say we get the news that Bottas will be retained by Mercedes in 2022. That is my not so crazy prediction, but I think that's going to happen this week. Anything else?
I don't think so. I think that pretty much covers it. We had kind of a boring restart to the season, unfortunately. But, hopefully next weekend we really get underway, and hopefully the championship battle is well and truly underway.
Yeah, let's hope the summer break is officially over with the aborted Belgium race, and we have a fantastic race in the Netherlands. I want to thank everyone for listening to everybody's most beloved father and son F1 podcast, and we are lights out.
See ya. Thanks for listening.